Minute before 5:30, we'd like to get started. So welcome, please take a seat, make yourself comfortable. Come on down to the front if you'd like, if you think you can see and hear better. And we'll wait just about a minute to get started and let folks come in. Okay, 5:30, I think we'll begin. Welcome and thank you, everybody. On behalf of the Milwaukee Board of Education, I welcome you and thank you on their behalf for your participation in tonight's forum. I'm Pat Neudecker, and my partner Mike Ritchie over there represent the superintendent search firm that assisted the board through this process. So we're happy to be here with you tonight and facilitate these 3 sessions. Each candidate will give a presentation to you, introduce themselves, and then we will take questions. We ask you please to write your questions on the index cards that you were able to pick up. If you don't have them, raise your hand. You can write any question. In our attempt to try and answer everyone's question, we use a process whereby I'll look at all of them and I'll try and cluster them around topics and see if we can make sure that all of your questions are heard. After that, you'll notice, please, that on the back of a lot of the chairs where you're seated is a poster with a QR code. The board is very interested in your feedback and in your input. So would you please, at the end of each session, or take that QR code with you? We have some handouts as well. And would you please go there, log in, and fill out the information form that the board is looking for. Tonight's session is also streamed, so we welcome people who are watching this from afar, and we really appreciate your interest in this very, very, very critical hire for all of Milwaukee. So I don't want to take our candidates' time. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brenda Casilius.
Well, thank you everybody for coming out this evening. I know some of you are coming from work or from family events and taking time away from family, so I really appreciate you coming out this evening. I'm Dr. Brenda Casilius, and I come from Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis, in the Minneapolis projects, to a single mother, and I was a single mother myself for 10 years, so I know firsthand some of the challenges facing some of our students. And I am just honored to be able to pay it back like folks paid it back for me when I was young, and blend and braid the kind of supports within a community to support children and to support families. It'll be very rare that you'll hear me talk about children alone. I always talk about children, families, and community, because I think it's through community capacity that you build the structures in place and create the conditions in which children succeed and thrive. I started my career as a paraprofessional with special ed students, mostly students who were emotionally and behaviorally challenged and had complex cognitive disabilities. Then I became a middle school teacher, middle school and high school school leader, and then I was associate superintendent in Memphis, Tennessee, turning around middle schools. I had 32 middle schools there, and about 4 of them were making adequate yearly progress then, which is how the state categorized whether you were exceeding or not the expectations. And within 4 years, about 4 were not making AYP. So it was a complete turnaround, raised reading scores about 22 percentage points. So very, very proud of that work within the 4 years that we were there. And it was a full team effort, mostly the principals and the instructional facilitators and the district staff who really reached in and got that work done. Because no one person does this work alone. It's going to take everybody really going in the same direction. Then after Memphis, came back and went to Minneapolis Public Schools and led the high school and middle school reform there, raised graduation rates, and then from there got my first superintendency. I was at the East Metro Integration District that worked with St. Paul Public Schools on an ambitious agenda of integrating our schools and offering choice to families for a more equitable opportunity to their education with 10 suburban districts and the city schools in St. Paul. And then from there, the governor called me up and asked me to be his state commissioner of education. And I was the state education commissioner under Governor Mark Dayton and his senior most policy advisor for 8 years. And then I was recruited to Boston, Massachusetts by Mayor Walsh to be the superintendent of schools there. 6 months into my tenure, the pandemic happened, and so did my city began to be challenged with the murder of George Floyd, which of course went across the nation as we all really realized the tragedy of that event. And so managing the racial discord that was happening within the district, as well as the pandemic and economic recession at the same time. I had 3 mayors, 3 years, 3 board chairs in 3 years, and the new mayor came in, and as all new mayors do, they appoint their teams, and she appointed her team that did not include me, so I came back to Minnesota, and now I'm leading CEO Fresh Energy, which is a climate change organization, getting me back to some of my policy roots, and have been honored to work on green initiatives, which I worked on with Mayor Wu as well. We were able to pass a $2 billion capital bond to improve our schools and green our schools and our buses as well, put in electric buses, so that was really great. And so it brings me here because I wake up every morning wanting to make a difference for children and pay it forward as though it was paid for me. And I just wasn't doing that in climate. I love climate work, and I think that that's really important, but I have to be making and connecting the dots for children so they can thrive. So that's why I'm here in Milwaukee, because there's 68,000 children who need leadership, and I'm excited to do that alongside, if I'm so lucky, to do that alongside so many really wonderful people and a wonderful community. Thank you. I'll take questions.
We are receiving, can you hear this? Is this working? Okay, great. We are receiving questions, so please make sure that we're just able to pick those up for you. And I will start with the first grouping of questions. The first one is about your leadership style.
Okay.
Can you describe your leadership style, the specific strategies you would use to foster collaboration and communication? And I'm going to combine a few cards that would say within the district, across staff, as well as outside of the district.
Great.
Especially parents and community members feel that their voices are not always heard. So how would you specifically make sure that that was happening?
Great. So my leadership style is collaborative. I consider myself an authentic leader. What you see is what you get. I put my pants on one leg at a time like everybody else. And I really believe that no one of us is as smart as all of us. So it's really partnering with the community and making sure that you're building a community and a team within the district. And so I'm an open communicator. I make myself very available. I get back to everybody within 24 hours. Sometimes it means that you have to tell someone that you are going to get back to them with someone else on staff who can answer directly their question, but I always follow that up with, if they don't get back to you, then please get back to me. So I'm often known for giving out my cell phone number because I feel like that's a way to earn trust. And so I just can't go to bed without getting back to folks. So I tell people, if you don't get something back from me, then you missed an S or an L in my name. And so I want to make sure that I'm always getting back to folks. The way that I involve folks and communicate with folks is to involve them in working groups, in commissions, or in shared decision making. And so I think it's really important to convene folks and bring them together around really tough, intractable problems and bringing different voices to the table. I think that that's important. And then you come out with the best solutions that you possibly can from there. Now, sometimes consensus is really hard to find, and sometimes people don't agree, but if people are listened to and heard, then you can move the needle forward, typically. And the way that you involve parents is, in Boston, one of the things we did was have equity roundtables and go through a racial planning analysis tool that we did, which is looking at the data, looking at the policy, and then being able to come up with solutions to mitigate that and move forward. So I'm always trying to bring solutions to the table and to the community, and be able to move those forward and listen to the community and get their solutions, find common ground, and then move forward.
Super. Can you tell us, please, what you have learned about what you think Milwaukee citizens want to see for MPS? And I'm going to add to that, knowing that MPS has a lot of challenges. What unique skill set or superpower do you have that you're willing to bring and share with MPS?
Okay. So what I've learned that Milwaukee parents want is higher academic achievement. They want their kids to be in safe and welcoming schools. That means they want to know that the adults have their best interests at heart, and that they are prepared and have everything that they need to get the job done. They want to have transparent communication. They want to be involved in shared decision-making. And they want someone who is going to be a truth teller and bring the hard decisions and stand up for their kids. So I think that's really important. I think they also want to know that their kids are cared for and connected and have lots of opportunities, that those opportunities are equitable across the district, within their school and in their neighborhood, and that there's greater opportunities for all students. So I think parents really want to be involved. They want to have equitable schools, and they want to see achievement up. They want to see arts and libraries and opportunity for their students. And then my unique superpower, I think, is that I'm an honest broker. I am caring and generous. And what you see is what you get. I'm never going to treat anybody disrespectful. People may disagree with my policies, but I never, ever treat anybody disrespectful. And I try to listen intently to what parents want and what community wants and what teachers want, and try to bridge what's possible to try to go forward. Now, I realize sometimes you fall short and you're not able to do 100% of what parents want or what someone's bringing to you, but you try to do whatever you can to move that needle forward with their requests of what they're asking for.
There's been a lot of conversation about the needs of MPS, the immediate needs, specifically raising academics, specifically reading and mathematics scores, improving the attendance rates, and improving the graduation rates. Can you speak to those issues and how you would address them?
Great. So, raising academics is our absolutely bottom line, right? We really want our children to succeed with raising academics. I've been fortunate in my career to work with amazing educators. I've been able to see educators and school leaders who have moved the needle forward, so to learn from them and then take those best practices. I've regionally led in Minnesota, in Memphis, Tennessee, in Boston, and so I've been able to really get the best of what is working out there. So being able to build off of what works here within the district and build off of best practice outside the district, put some of those pieces together in order to move the achievement forward. In particular with literacy, Act 20 is requiring us to teach a phonics curriculum to early childhood so that children have a really strong base of literacy at early childhood, and then also they're ready for kindergarten. And so that's critically important. So I'm a big supporter of early childhood programming for students, high quality early childhood programming. I was able to, in Minnesota, rally millions and millions of dollars in order to get high quality early childhood. We also put in place, the department was in charge of putting in place the Parent Aware system, which was a system of five-star system to inform parents on the quality of those Parent Aware system, to put the quality of those rating systems, and so that was really fortunate. We were also able to do pathways, some multilingual pathway programs, bilingual pathway programs from preschool through grade 3 in some of our schools in Boston, which was great. So early childhood, putting in place high quality materials for raising academic achievement, and then making sure that teachers have high quality professional development and moving academic achievement. As for attendance, that's about students being connected in schools and having meaningful experiences in the classroom. And so you want to make sure that students feel connected, that they have a best friend at school, that they're able to move the needle forward in terms of their own capacity and agency and advocating for themselves at school so that they want to be there. Sometimes people use incentives around attendance. And students told me themselves today, you know, maybe you could work on the food and provide better food for them, more nutritious food. So I think that's something that's a priority for the students. And the staff have talked about that as well. So when students want to come to school, they have a best friend there, they feel connected, they're connected to athletics and arts and programming and those sorts of things. They get nutritious foods, and their whole well-being is taken care of. I think that is really important. And then as far as graduation rates, that's about really keeping track, particularly at the early grades in 9th grade. Research shows that students who miss 2 or more courses in 9th grade have only a 50% chance of graduation. So it's really being on track for graduation by not being credit deficient. And then you put in place the scaffolding programs with the counselors to be able to support students when they get off track. And they can take online courses or credit recovery courses, but really, we really want them to succeed first in the courses that they take for graduation. And then you want to make sure that those are equitable across all your high schools, so that not some high schools have advanced courses, but all high schools have advanced courses. High schools have opportunities for career and technical education. They have opportunities for international baccalaureate, and really high rigorous, high value, good programming that's going to get them what they need to succeed and be ready for college or career.
In addition to that, let's shift our lens to equity. Equity has become a buzzword amongst districts, including ours. What are your plans? What would it look like if you ensure equity is institutionalized in our culture, which would include students, funding allocations, special enrollment, access to resources, resource allocation, et cetera? How do you apply your equity beliefs to that practice?
So equity has always been a value of mine and the lens that I do my work. As an African American woman, it's incredibly important for me to be able to forward the work of our students, particularly our students who are of color and poor, and that's been my entire life's work. So for me, it's just natural that I am going to put that lens on everything that I do, because I want to work with the most vulnerable students and the students that need the most resources. So when I put on that lens, what that looks like for student enrollment is making sure that there's high quality schools in every neighborhood, that we're using community resources to support families and to build strong systems within those neighborhoods. And then what it looks like in terms of parent involvement. I talked already a little bit about our equity roundtables and ensuring that there's equitable voice and that you're hearing all voices at the table, particularly voices that don't agree. And so that when you are listening to different voices that don't agree at the table, then you can vet it out and try to problem solve and come with what you do agree on and where you can move forward on. So getting equitable resources means looking at the student population, where are their needs, prioritizing the students that need it the most, and getting those resources to students and teachers and schools that need it most. In Milwaukee, what I've learned is that there are 2 schools that are significantly exceeding and doing extremely well in terms of how the state's rating them. And then there are 22 schools that are doing well and exceeding expectations. And then there are 44 that are meeting expectations. So those 22 and 2 schools, 24 schools, are the schools that you are going to be looking at and learning from. And then the next 44 schools that are meeting expectations, you want to give them a little boost. And then the rest of the schools that really have few measures in which they're meeting or they're just failing to meet, then you do some really serious interventions and provide additional significant resources to those schools to make sure the teachers and the principals and the whole school community, and really the community outside of the school too, is being addressed in terms of its capacity to serve and to help children succeed.
Let's talk about organizational structure. How do you go about working with central office and administrators and out to the buildings? Do you believe in centralized or decentralized? What would a central office and supportive staff look like under your leadership?
So I've worked in many different settings with organizations. So sometimes it's regional by a K-12 pathway, by different areas of the city. Sometimes it's by academic and grade level, so middle, high, and senior high school, and early childhood centers. I think that the best way that's worked that I've experienced, and I'm open to really talking to the community and how it's worked best here, is that academics and by grade level it really works well. So when you get high school principals together, they can talk about high schools because their work is very unique and their job is unique in how they're managing their schools and managing the instruction at their schools. And they have little in common with the early childhood center, for instance, and how the things that they have to think about in terms of youth development and where those children are at. So I think organizing the district in around academic area and grade level area, I think is a really great way that I've seen be positive. But coming in and learning and talking to principals about how they're organized and talking to the community, I think, and teachers and how that's going to be helpful is really a great way to do it. I think also then for district level staff, as much as you can do cross-functional work, is really helpful. When I was in Memphis, we had the cross-functional teams that worked together to support our middle schools, particularly when we were doing school turnaround, and that was extremely helpful to have the district staff organized, supporting middle schools, particularly and hiring the best teachers to get into our schools that were struggling.
Great. Let's shift to the role of teachers. How do you support teachers? How do you understand what's needed? And how do you arrange support for them, whether it's professional development, assignment of classes? And how would you also go about recruiting and retaining the best teachers?
So in supporting teachers, it's about listening to them and understanding their work. And then that means going out and visiting and talking about instruction with them, asking them if they have what they need to be successful, and having a shared sense of accountability around the learning of children. And then working in teams to move forward. So if you have a curriculum adoption, for instance, having teachers be part of those decisions and what you're going to adopt is really important. What types of professional development they want to engage in and having them have voice in that. So supporting teachers means supporting their working conditions and supporting the ways in which they have their time is protected with students to actually forward instruction and making sure that they have the resources to do their job. I've talked to thousands of teachers and they say, please just protect my time, particularly special ed teachers who spend a lot of time on paperwork. It's one of the areas that I wish I had been able to really move when I was state commissioner. I couldn't find agreement around paperwork and minimizing the paperwork. It just eluded me and the time that I had to work on it. But it's an area that I wish I had been able to move forward because it was a huge burden. My sister is a special ed, she's retired now, but she was a special ed paraprofessional, and I asked her, well, why don't you want to become a special ed teacher? She said, because I really enjoy teaching the kids, because the teachers spend so much time outside the classroom away from the children. And so I'd like to, at some time in my career, find a solution to that so that teachers, special ed teachers would have a lot more time with students.
Question about resources, specifically class sizes that are out of control, many classrooms that have high numbers of students. What are your thoughts on class size and also distribution of students? And I think we could piggyback and add attendance areas where schools are either crowded and other schools are very underrepresented. What are your thoughts on addressing those issues?
Okay. So class size, if I could, the research shows anywhere between 1 teacher to 15 kids can make a huge difference. I'm not certain the class size, but I do understand that there's some disparity between schools, and some are bigger and some are smaller class sizes, which is typical, particularly when you have underutilized schools. And so I think if I could, it'd be great to do a zero-based budget and look at class size. I'm not sure also if in the union, if it's sometimes with union agreements, there are class size agreements. And so it's, look at what the state says about class sizes and what's mandated. Look at class size mandates with your own local policies. But ideally, smaller teacher to student ratios are always better, particularly in a turnaround situation. So sometimes you may not be able to do smaller class sizes for the entire district, but you might target smaller class sizes in certain schools to move the agenda forward in those schools, particularly in literacy, because children, high dosage tutoring, high dosage time around literacy and time on reading and practicing reading absolutely increases achievement. And so I think that the more that you can reduce that time or those class sizes with students and increase time, the better. And then for attendance areas and the underutilized of schools, this is also part of a larger facilities planning that would need to happen in terms of looking at where are the students enrolling and where is choice happening within the district and why is that happening. So sometimes you can find out some information about that from surveys. Sometimes you can find that out by walking the school and being able to understand how big a school is compared to the demographics and the population of the area. Birth rates obviously is really important as you look at those. And then, obviously local school boards have the opportunity to adjust attendance areas, but you want to make sure that there's walk zones and areas, safe areas for children to be able to walk to school, and that you're not making your attendance areas so big. And anytime you do that, it's disruptive because it also impacts start times or ending times, and then that disrupts parents' work schedules. So, there's always these other offshoots that have to happen. So it's a really broad level of planning around facilities that involves enrollment and attendance and choice. And you'd want to look also at the local charter and public offerings that are available too, and what's happening in those schools around their enrollment and attendance.
Great. I think we'll piggyback on that and ask your opinion on charter schools. So authorizing charters and holding charters accountable. What is your experience and your position on those issues?
So I had Minnesota was the birthplace of charter schools, and so I've had a lot of experience with charter schools. As state commissioner, we put in place an evaluation system for our charter schools. I've never been against charter schools, and so that's not something that I've been against. But I have had a problem with vouchers because of the movement of money off of public to private, and privates weren't held accountable. But in terms of accountability, charters need to be held accountable to high performance, just like our schools need to be held accountable. So there's a huge accountability that has to happen around quality. And so it's not a big issue around whether you're a charter or a private or a traditional public school. It's really about the level of quality and making sure that all children have an excellent school to go to.
several questions about bilingual programming. So what is your belief and also your approach for supporting bilingual education, with MPS being the largest bilingual program in Wisconsin? And also, how do you plan to support students and protect students and staff and our families during a very difficult time about immigration and protecting our schools from ICE?
Really good questions. So bilingual education is really important. There's about 15% of students here who have home language other than English as their first language. And so bilingual education is super important, both dual and one-way programming, as well as the seal of biliteracy and giving other opportunities. I was able to go to the MLS school today, which was absolutely wonderful to visit that school and hear more about their work. That's more about world languages than it is biliteracy. And so that is a really great school. And I would commit to trying to find materials with in home languages, as well as being able to find educators who are bilingual. I think those are two really key pieces. It shows representation so that students can speak their language to teachers that look and speak like them and understand their culture and language being very important. And so it's about biculturalism with our bilingual learners and providing the materials in their home language and providing educators that are bilingual. Also, I think it's important for pathways so that their growth in one grade level can also go to the next grade level if they move on. So making sure that you have programs, dual language programming that is K-12, so that students can have those types of supports throughout their entire time within the system. As ICE, this is really an awful time for us around the threat of deportation. When I got to Boston, there was a controversy that was in the past, but it was still kind of stewing there around our school police, which were special police. They had special policing powers, like park police type of powers. They didn't wear weapons or anything, but we had our own police force of 76 police officers, and they were sharing information with the BRIC, and so we had to put a stop to that with creating new data sharing policies in terms of what they could share and couldn't share with the police, and when they could and when they could not. And so we convened a working group of civil rights lawyers and our board member, students, and some other community members to make sure that when we presented the policy to our board, it was properly vetted and agreed upon, and that the community knew what we were going to be passing. Then after that policy passed, we trained all of our officers to make sure they understood the ramifications and what would happen if they violated our new policy. And so I think it's putting in those types of protections that's really important in terms of what we can do as a district around policy. And then it's making sure that we're availing all of the community supports and all of the supports within our schools to protect students and for students to know their rights and for families to know their rights. And so the school, the family, and the school personnel understanding and students understanding their rights and around ICE and when ICE comes.
Shift to policy and governance type questions. What is the difference between board goals and district goals? How do you align goals, and how do you and the board work together to strengthen MPS?
So I would hope that the board goals and the district goals were the same, and that there was a strong alignment between the two in a strategic plan that the community had input in and believes in. So hopefully that there's a strong strategic plan, outlines your goals, outlines the measures that you are expecting. There's ways to monitor those goals and hold ourselves publicly accountable, that there's a shared accountability for that, and that you report on them, you are reporting publicly to them on a regular basis, and then you're being held accountable for that. And then when you see where you're not meeting your goals, what you are going to need to do is reevaluate each year or even mid-year if there's additional funding due to vacancies or whatever, that you would realign and you would put new supports in place where you need to adjust. So it's a constant monitoring of your goals, a reporting out publicly, and board meetings. Maybe there's a working group that's a strategic planning working group of the board that would work on lining budgets, strategies, and measurements, and monitoring so that you're constantly in this continuous improvement loop.
Super. Let me find the little pile because I had a great little stack here. Another policy and hot topic right now, but your opinions, please, on police officers in schools, how you would go about it, how they're funded, and what their role is, if any.
Yes, so it's the opposite that we had in Boston. So in Boston, we had 76 special police officers, and we had our own police force. They had a relationship with Boston Public Police Department, but I had my own chief of staff, or chief of police there. And then the state removed that after the George Floyd murder, and the states removed special policing powers from park police, municipal police, and the school police. So we had to dismantle our police department and work on a plan of action for how we were still going to keep our schools safe and have school officers. So we created a new unit of school safety officers, negotiated that with the labor partners that we had, and we were able to give them the training that they needed to de-escalate, training around restorative justice, and we felt like it was a really good, strong model. We worked with our student advisory group on that, and really moved, I think, a national model for how to remove police out of your schools and then replace them with school safety supervisors in your schools. And they did a lot of community policing. We also worked with the Boston Police Department Community Policing Division, which had, I think, 15 officers, and they did a lot of work within our schools, particularly our high schools, around the athletic programming, community programs with black males and girls, and our entire community offering different support systems within the community in the park and rec system. So that was very, very positive. Wisconsin's in a different place. The state has said and ordered, a judge recently ordered, that police have to come back into the schools. So because it is an order that is happening, not only state law, but the police order, what needs to happen now is the 25 police officers will come into the schools, but what you can still do is train on de-escalation strategies, on youth development. You can train on restorative justice practices and community policing, so that those are the values and that you instill within this group of individuals who are working within our schools. And then you monitor that and you retrain and you monitor. And where there are deviations from what the expectations are, you deal with that. But you have to make sure that you are presenting a safe environment for children in the schools, and where there's not a sense of fear around that.
Going to shift to a question about finances and try and, again, combine three areas of interest. One, you are aware of recent financial problems in the school district. Additionally, there was a large financial referendum that was passed by this community and funds made available for the school district to use when there was a referendum. And additionally, several questions about budgeting. So with all of these financial issues, what is your process for putting together a budget, and how are the priorities determined?
Well, I've already shared that my priorities are to get it to the most vulnerable students and the schools that need it the most, which I think is really important. We had something called the Opportunity Index that used a lot of community indicators of supports that were available to schools, and where there weren't huge supports for schools and the community didn't have the capacities within there, they got more money for partnerships that went directly to community providers to help with the school. There's also compensatory funding that goes for poor students, and then funding for students who are EL, additional funding for special ed to build back the gap from the federal government and state that doesn't fully fund special ed. So being able to, make all these special provisions so that the dollars are following the students that need them the most. And then there was additional money put in concentration of poverty for schools that were over 40% students experiencing poverty. I think also with putting together a budget, particularly if you have a large referendum and the new influx of funding, there's going to be different opinions about where that money should go. And I think it's important to get that money to students and get it to the classroom rather than to district office services, for instance. It's important that every dollar goes first to students and to the classroom. And so building the budget is about looking at working groups of the budget, making sure that you're understanding where school budgets are and where the needs are, lining that to your strategic plan and what the board is saying is the strategic initiatives of the district, making sure those are all properly funded and you have the right class sizes and you have the teachers in there, you have your principals at your schools, and then you build back your budget to other things. And then you present the budget to the board after all the working groups. So it shouldn't be a secret to anybody. Everybody should really understand what's in it at that point that you're presenting it to the board. And then it's going to the board, they're revising it, they're saying what they've heard back from community about things that need to change. You go back, you make another change, you have another hearing, you go back to the board. Hopefully that's in really good shape after several hearings, and then hopefully you have a budget that you can pass and people can agree to for students.
I think we might try and combine one other category and then see how we're doing on time. This is about enrollment, how you will address enrollment challenges, and also what is your take on closing schools, undersubscribed schools?
Well, let me start with raising enrollment. We have birth rates dropping, so that's just a reality. I think most folks know that there's a lot less births going on, so there's a lot less students that are anticipated over the next several years and decades. So we know that there's going to be more underutilized schools. So we know that that's a reality, and that does actually cost more money. So I think that it's important that you get an enrollment committee together and you start looking at the options. I think that Milwaukee schools can be parents' first choice. I think in a really choice environment that we have here in Milwaukee, you have to be competitive, and parents have to know the true stories of what's happening within the schools and what the opportunities are. I heard stories today when I was going around that students didn't know that they had access to certain AP classes or access to these college opportunities for dual college credits. And so we've got to make sure that families know what opportunities are happening within MPS. So I think that's really important. I think another thing with enrollment is just making sure that the current families that you have are happy and listening to them and finding out and surveying them and having community-wide meetings and really trying to resolve the issues within the community so that they see your best work and they see that you're working on behalf of their children and that you care about their children, and that helps. And I think one other thing is just the facilities themselves. When they're broken down or, they have lead in the water or things just seem to, you don't have gymnasiums or art classrooms or fields or playgrounds, parents will make other choices. And so it's looking at your full facility plan and trying to figure out ways to make a quality guarantee. This is something we did in Boston, was make a quality guarantee, and I was able to work with the mayor on $100 million for the schools to get social workers, counselors, psychologists, school libraries, so that every school in Boston had a library. They did not, so we built a 5-year plan for every school to have a library. I think that there are just kind of non-negotiables that we expect for a high-quality school, and we want to deliver it. So we need to find ways to get the resources so that we can do it. And then you prioritize those resources and start doing that with your most vulnerable populations first, where the community assets are the least when you do your community asset mapping, and you see that, oh, this community is a low wealth community, meaning the houses don't raise a lot of property taxes in that community, but you go and you give more money in those communities. And so, or that community is missing a library, so then you make sure that the school has a library. So it's really doing that community mapping and asset mapping when you are looking at those pieces.
Thank you. We are nearing the end of our time. I think I will combine several questions that asked you to wrap up with why you're the best candidate, why you feel you should be the next superintendent of MPS, and if you are, how long do you plan to stay here?
Oh, okay. Well, I am caring and authentic person, and what you see is what you get. I'm always going to put students first. I have expertise in budgeting and resourcing and rallying the community for getting big things done. So we were also able to pass a $2 billion capital bond before leaving with Mayor Wu in Boston, which was wonderful. So it's, really trying to think about how do you build those coalitions. I also have city, state, and school district experience. So that, I think, is important in terms of navigating the political landscape, especially at this time when they're dismantling the federal government, and there might be policies that are impacting our children, particularly our undocumented children, our children who are LGBTQ. They're fearful right now. Climate change is real, and they're pulling back all of that, and so kids really are feeling quite fearful right now. And so I think I'm a champion of those causes and our children, and I think that makes me a really good candidate. I also have regional experience in Minnesota, in Tennessee, in Memphis, Tennessee, and very large, diverse urban districts, and I'm courageous. People have not liked some of the times that I've had to stand in the gap for kids and get things done. Even at personal risk, it's still needed to get done, and I'm going to do that. And I'm at a stage in my career now where I'm looking for a district to be the last district that I'm in, to be able to go in and make a national model of. Thanks.
Thank you. Before we say goodbye to Dr. Casilius, I'd like to remind all of you that those QR codes is your link to the feedback form. So for each candidate, please make sure you'll take a look at that. That will be open till tomorrow evening at 5 o'clock. Please join me in thanking Dr. Brenda Casilius. And we have about a 15-minute break. The next candidate will begin at 6:30. Well, I try to. Start again, please, if you would take your seats. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Again, we're going to continue with the same process. We're trying to categorize, consolidate the questions to make sure we get all the issues out for you. I apologize if we don't answer your question specifically. In fairness to all the candidates, and especially since this is being live streamed, we're going to try and ask all candidates similar sequence of questions and also take additional questions as time permits. So with that said, would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Joshua Starr.
Thank you. You know, there are seats up here if anybody wants to come closer. No, not so much? How's everybody tonight? Good. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. I've had a wonderful day in the district, visiting schools, talking to folks, and I'm really excited for my second community forum today. So I want to start by telling you about David, who was a student of mine when I was working in Brooklyn. And it was, maybe fourth month of school. I came in, and David was wearing a tie. I was like, all right, interesting. Not exactly clear why, but he was wearing a tie. And the older male teachers in my building always used to tell me, Star, you can't wear a tie, right? Because kids are going to pull you down the stairs when they act out, because our kids were labeled severely emotionally disturbed. Many of them had behavioral problems, they had emotional problems, many of them had been misdiagnosed from a really early age. We had kids who needed a lot of help and support. I felt like, I should wear a tie because I'm a teacher. I was young, I was 22, I still had a goatee and like earrings, and I was like, I gotta look the part, always look the part. Despite what the older teacher said. My colleague across the way, Mona Ferguson, who was a fabulous teacher, said to me at the end of the day, she said, Josh, I think David was wearing a tie because you're a role model for him. And that's when I kind of realized it was serious. It was serious being a teacher. And I also realized I was kind of inadequate. I was a brand new teacher. I did not study to become a teacher. I always knew I would do something in public service. I had experience working with kids. I had worked in group homes with kids coming out of jail, things like that. But here I was, the least experienced teacher who was allowed to work with the most vulnerable kids in New York City, the most vulnerable kids. I was allowed to teach them as the least experienced teacher. And as I went on in my teaching career and then I went into leadership, I realized that that was actually the problem to solve. What do we allow? What do adults allow to happen in schools? What do we permit? And so when I went on to become a superintendent of schools in 2 different districts, very, very diverse school districts, did a lot of equity work, right? Dismantling systems of oppression, breaking down barriers, ensuring every single child was loved, valued, and respected. And when I went in to the nonprofit world and my recent stint in corporate America, that question has always sat before me. What do we allow? What do we permit? You all have seen the data, I imagine, in Milwaukee. I've seen the data, I've gone through every school report card, I've seen the results. And I've also seen and know, just like in every place, there are wonderful teachers, and there are hardworking people, and there are dedicated principals, and there are incredible kids, and every family wants their child to have the best. And yet I look at the data. It's real. It's right in front of us. And it says, what's going on? What are we allowing to happen? What have we permitted? So we're going to have some choices before us. We're going to have some hard decisions to make. We're going to have to wrestle with this question of how do we ensure that every single child is in a great school every single day, because that's what they deserve, right? A great school where there's high quality instruction every day, where teachers are leading and collaborating and learning, where principals have established a culture of excellence grounded in equity. Right, where there's a culture of teamwork, where parents are part of the solution and invited in, where kids are loved and valued and respected every single day, and they're known. That's what a great school looks like. We actually know how to do that. We know how to do that. The evidence is clear. The question as we go forward, and the reason why I want to do this work here in Milwaukee is about what do we allow? What do we permit? What are we going to do to make sure that every child is in the great school they deserve every single day? That's the work before us. It is not going to be an easy road, but I do know from what I've seen and what I've heard, what I've listened to, the willpower is there, right? The desire is there, the recognition is there that we're going to have to make sure going forward that every child is getting what they need. They feel loved, valued, and respected. They're reading on grade level. They're doing math on grade level. They're walking across that stage ready to thrive in an increasingly complex world with more options when they leave than when they came in, that our kids are coming to school, right? They're coming to school. That's the work. That's the work. That's why I love being a superintendent of schools. That's why I love supporting other superintendents that I've done for the last few years. And that's why I want to be here in Milwaukee. So thank you for coming out tonight. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I know you have a whole bunch of questions, so Pat, let's have at it, all right? What do we got? Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of questions. So let's start with your leadership style. What's it like? What will it look like? What will we see? And what are your specific strategies for collaboration and communication within the district and outside of the district?
Leadership style, collaboration. So I'm pretty consistent. I'm pretty blunt, I'm pretty consistent. I don't play a lot of games, I'm very transparent. It is what it is. This is about a collective effort, right? There's only one decision a superintendent gets to make on their own. You know what that is? Snow day. Because everything else is collective, whether it's state law, federal law, bargaining agreements, whatever it is, there's interested people. So it's a collective effort. No school system is run well by fiat. It doesn't work that way. Now, the superintendent may be in charge, but the board of directors obviously plays a very, very large role. There's all these different players. The community is important. It's about collective impact. So you will never not know what I'm thinking and what's on my mind and what we're going to do. Transparency is absolutely essential. I am a big believer and have a track record of engagement. I like to go out to where people are. I don't like them to come to me. I like to go in or out and to be with people. And I also, so two other quick pieces on that. Organizing collective effort is about processes, quite frankly, right? You got to have some processes for making sure people understand how decisions are going to be made is a really important piece of it. One of the things I learned in my most recent experience outside of education, corporate and nonprofit, is how decisions are made differently. And in ways, I'm not a big believer that schools should be run like a business. It's very different operations. But there are some processes like Lean Agile. I mean, I won't go into all the sort of corporate speak that I actually started using. And I've been teaching superintendents now and district how to organize differently around like immediate kind of data that will tell you whether you're on track and whether you're making progress. I want to apply those to the work here. But make no mistake, it is collective effort. And, you know, I don't have time to not be honest and transparent with people. Like, put the data on the table, take a look at it, what's the facts on the grounds, and then how are we going to make decisions together? Not every decision is made together. Some decisions rest with the board of directors, some rest with the superintendent, some rest with the principal. That's fine. Some rest collectively, but you absolutely can expect and hold me accountable for transparency, as well as for engagement and getting people around the table to make some, tough decisions together, because that's the way you build a strong system.
Super. I'm going to piggyback on the communication question, especially with parents. And a today breaking issue, somebody writes that many parents found out today about lead exposure in their children's schools, and they found out on the news, not from the district. How do you, what concrete steps would you take to improve communication with parents?
So everyone these days is fighting for attention. There's so much stuff going on, whether it's on social media or whatever, there's constantly fighting for attention. And the rumor mills, and I've experienced this, are vast, and it's amazing how someone can post something, and I'm not speaking about this situation, which is what I've experienced. Someone posts something, and all of a sudden it takes off like wildfire in the press, and like, that actually wasn't the situation. So it is essential that a superintendent has multiple strategies for communication. As they used to say at AT&T, 7 times 7 ways. Now it's probably about 37 times 37 ways. You got to communicate regularly and often with folks. And you also have to know who the people are who are talking to other people and make sure they have the facts on the ground. And you got to put information out. Look, I get messages from my child's school, my oldest, who's a junior in high school. I'm like, really? You're sending me another one about, do I really need to? But at the same time, I also know what happens. If the principal doesn't send something out, then they get, in trouble for someone saying, oh, there was a fight and I didn't know about it. So I want to know what the policies are. I want to know what the practices are. You can expect, it is not always possible to get something out before it goes out in the public. Police respond to something, it's on police scanner or whatever, the police put it out on Twitter, and again, I'm just talking hypothetically, I'm not saying anything about the Milwaukee Police Department. They put something out on Twitter, all of a sudden it blows up before the superintendent even knows about it and can get to the board. That kind of stuff happens now. What I would ask for, and I'll stop on this, I also think that sometimes we have to have a little grace when it comes to these things, that if there are times when it can be hard to get ahead of something if it's out there in the community. You got to be able to respond. You got to get out as quickly as you possibly can with factual information in multiple ways, right? Whether it's text, posting on the website, whatever it may be, posting obviously on social, talking to the press, making sure you have really good relationships with the press. That's how you get information out. And I also know in this day and age, stuff gets out there that you have no control over because of, look at how many people are videoing now, right? And people are tweeting, right? That's just how it works these days. And you got to be on top of it, but a lot of it comes down to just managing it to the best of your ability through multiple mediums and being on top of it every day, right? And being consistent with your messaging.
So in addition to that messaging, what have you learned about what Milwaukee citizens want to see for MPS?
Well, what I've learned in, when you start these processes, you do a lot of research, you look at the web, you read stuff, you talk to people and I know, some people and all that. I have the sense, and you all tell me, I don't know how would you tell me, maybe thumbs up, thumbs down, there's a recognition that while there are absolutely pockets of excellence, and I saw some of them today. The kids that I saw today, right? The young people are awesome, right? There are clearly people working really hard, and people want to see the system succeed. I'm sure there are people that don't, right? There's no community that is fully of one mind when it comes to that. I do think folks are ready to make some tough choices, is the sense I get. Folks are recognizing that there's been a series of challenges for many years that need to be addressed and dealt with. They are complex challenges without easy answers, but guaranteed that my experience doing this work, both as a superintendent and someone who has helped other superintendencies, there are decision-making processes, there are ways of creating collective effort to address really hard issues. Other places have done it. I've been there, I've seen them, right? I do think there is the willpower to sort of get that done. But you gotta roll up your sleeves and have the courage to come to the table and say, yeah, we want to work together and make the place better for all of our kids, because the results that we have aren't acceptable. So we gotta do something different, right? And that's what I want to be able to bring.
Great, thank you. This group of questions about equity.
Yeah.
Equity has become a buzzword amongst many districts, including ours. What are your plans? What does equity mean to you? How will you institutionalize that in our culture that will help students and especially our disenfranchised students?
So oftentimes people think about equity as allocating resources to those who need it the most. Kids who need it the most should get the most, and that's absolutely true. And resources is time, talent, and people, right? To allow me as a young teacher to teach the most vulnerable kids in New York, that was an equity or a lack of equity stance, right? Because you need to put your best with your most vulnerable. Equity is also about dismantling barriers, right? And dismantling systems of oppression. So when I was in Stamford, Connecticut, very, very diverse school district, I had to dismantle the tracking system, the academic tracking. It was hard. It was hard. But it was a system where white kids and the few Asian kids got the best. Literally, parents got to choose their own teachers. The gatekeeping on AP courses was ridiculous. And then, of course, what do? You put the newest teacher teaching the 9th grade remedial class, right, which was mostly black and Latino. That's a system design question. Those are barriers, right? When you look at, and I used to do this every year, you look at the enrollment in AP classes and credit-bearing classes in September, and then you look at it again on October 15th, once the first midterm has been given, and you see that there were 30 kids enrolled in AP Lit on September 1st, and then, oh gosh, 15 of them dropped out. They just couldn't handle it. That's the kind of gatekeeping that districts do when they don't have equity. I have done a lot of work on equity in my career. You can read about it. You were giving me a plug for my book. Was that it, Pat? There you go. There you go. On equity-based leadership. Sorry, anytime, when you're an author, you got to do that. But one of the things that I've seen districts do, and I was just with a district that's been doing this, they spend a lot of money on equity work. They have a chief equity officer. They don't have a portfolio. They don't have a clear line of responsibility. They don't have a budget. They don't have a definition for it, but they got trained. They got trained. They did a book study. I've seen this all over. And when you ask, show me what it looks like in the budget. Show me what it looks like in how you make decisions about what children are going to get every day. That's when you test it out. So I am very glad that I have clearly heard a commitment to equity in Milwaukee. I'm excited to learn more about what it actually means in practice. A lot of it is about access and opportunity. A lot of it is about how kids feel loved, valued, and respected in every school every day, no matter where you come from, no matter what you look like, no matter what language you speak, how are you loved, valued, and respected, and does the child know that the school is a place where they're seen, right? And they have access to high-quality instruction, and no excuses are made, regardless of what's going on, no excuses are made for mediocrity. That's my stance. So.
Thank you. Let's talk about organizational or operational structure and the infrastructure needed to do the work you're describing. How do you plan to navigate the current climate of the structure of MPS, whether it's central office or building leadership, whether it's compartmentalized or whether it's decoupled or all those words? What will that look like, and how do you create an organizational structure to support the work?
Very carefully. So I have been through like every page of the website. I've been through every page of the budget. Sorry, let me say this right. I like to understand a little more who's responsible for what and how decisions get made. Given the portfolio of schools that exist, there's a lot of differences. And how do we organize to make sure they're getting support? So let me step back for a minute. I have never seen a great school without a great principal. I've seen a good school without a great principal. I've never seen a great school without a great principal. We must have great principals in every school. So what does that mean, right? Principals, and let me say, so superintendents and their cabinet, right, working with the school board and employee associations, create the conditions for success, for that work to happen. That's what they do. And principals with their teachers have to lead the work of improvement. That's how schools improve. So at the central office, it then comes down to decision-making clarity. It comes down to clear roles and responsibilities. It comes down to organizing collective learning. So you look at, I'll just pull it out, so like you have a bunch of Montessori schools, you have a bunch of dual language schools. Like, how do you make sure those principals are constantly learning and working with each other? They're getting clear messages from central office. Central office does not assume that they are the ones who have the expertise to drive an instructional improvement. And again, I'm not diminishing central office. Like, central office people can be great and wonderful, but it's about clarity of roles and responsibilities. The easiest thing to do, and what I've seen superintendents do all over the place, and I did it when I got to Stanford, it was the wrong thing to do, is restructure. Here's a new org chart. I'm going to make everybody apply for the job, and you spend a year restructuring, and you don't actually reorient around the work. What does the work look like to support school improvement? How are we dealing with the urgent, as the Eisenhower make, the urgent versus important? There are schools in Milwaukee that are clearly doing well and need some continued support and monitoring. There are some schools in Milwaukee that are probably on a good path and like doing okay and probably need some additional support, or do need some additional support and monitoring. And then there's some schools that I imagine are in crisis, where kids are just, I've looked at the data, and you've got to differentiate your strategy. So the structure, form follows function, right? You don't start with the structure, you start with the work. The work is about supporting principals so that they can do their best work. And then the structure follows, but clarity of roles and responsibilities, clear messages, that's like sort of, the baseline requirement that I have.
Great. I'm going to ask a question about specific programs. MPS is home to the largest bilingual program in Wisconsin, serving over 12,000 learners. How do you plan to support bilingual education? Let me make sure I get all this. What is your vision for what bilingual education should be? And in our current times, very specifically, how do you plan to support and protect immigrants and protect all of our schools from ICE?
Let me first be clear on something with protection of kids, because I don't want anybody to assume that it's just bilingual kids or recent immigrants that also need protection, LGBTQ, like every child needs to be protected. So I just want to be clear that like my stance on protection goes to everybody. So I'll get to that second. So when I was working in New York City, one of the programs that was under my leadership was English language learners, right? So early childhood English language learners, instructional technology, gifted and talented, and special ed. And I learned an enormous amount then, actually, because I didn't have much experience prior to that. One of the things that bothered me, of course, is the difference between the research on what we know about how kids actually develop a new language. We used to call it Bix and Calps. We don't call it that anymore, I don't think. And what some of the politics demands, which is like you got to learn English immediately. So I do need to know more about the current structure of what bilingual and dual language programs look like. I am a huge proponent and fan of them. We had a number of them in Montgomery County. They were some of the most sought after schools. They were great. I was not able to get them off the ground in Stanford for a range of reasons. I would like to see more bilingualism and multi-language work than less. But again, I'm curious also as to how they're currently organized to make sure that kids are learning at a high level, right? So absolutely maintain, expand if possible, always becomes a resource issue, everything's a matter of choices. But if they are such an important part of the fabric of Milwaukee, well then we would want to maintain and expand it. When it comes to protecting kids, given what's going on these days, it's a couple-fold approach. So one thing I learned in my previous district is that when you're doing the right thing in protecting kids, but you don't tell others that you're doing it, sometimes it can bite you in the butt, excuse my language. And even though if people like it, if they're not part of the decision-making, because I had to do that in my previous district when there was I won't go into the story, I can tell you later. So part of what I want to know is like, what's the community stance on this stuff? Different communities have different feelings, right? And it's not something a superintendent can do alone. Where does the police department stand? Where do the, elected officials stand? Like, what's the values that people have around what it is that they want to see? Where is the board of directors on it? Right? I mean, I have to understand, like, I know what my own personal feelings are, but I also know that I serve a community, and you got to follow the community standards. So I very much want to know what the coordinated approach is, because it's never just about the schools. The schools are like the hub, but, police department, social service agencies, there's so many different factors. You got to have conversation with them and say, okay, here is our stance. Getting information out to folks in multiple ways is essential, and then take, I think it was Jefferson that said, you got to stand against unjust laws. I think I'm paraphrasing. And I am certainly absolutely willing to do that, and have done that in more times than I can count. But it also has to be a community decision. It's not appropriate for a superintendent to do something that is far afield from what the board of directors and, whether it's the police department or the mayor, whatever, what they say, you got to try to work in concert with them. And then my job, of course, is to teach, is to teach adults and push them on it, and try to convince them. But let me also say, regardless of that, every single child must feel loved, valued, and respected in every single school every day. They have to have relationships with each other, with teachers, with other adults as well. And this is bus drivers, this is lunch staff, this is secretaries, this is everybody, custodial staff, who have to understand their role in making kids feel seen and know that they're protecting, they're safe, regardless of what's going on out there. And you can do that and must do that. Like, I won't accept anybody who doesn't do that, quite frankly, who doesn't see that as part of their job. Regardless of what's going on out there and what you say, like, as your legal stance against the policy, there's no excuse for not, wrapping your arms around a kid, and making them feel safe and making them feel like you've got their back and you're going to do whatever you can to support them, regardless of what the policies are.
Thank you. Let's talk about some current issues as well. Class sizes.
Yep.
Perception that class sizes are out of control. Many classrooms that might have just under 40 students, which is unacceptable. What do you do in a district-wide approach to monitoring class size?
So class sizes are the third rail of the superintendency, because look, class sizes of 40 is too much. I mean, it can just be unsafe. I have been embroiled in, and I've seen others get embroiled in, debates over whether having 22 or 25 kids is the issue. And the research is actually really clear on this. There's marginal impact. Now, again, 40 is too much. I mean, that gets too much. But assuming we have some kind of standard on what a reasonable class size is, I'm assuming this policy that says elementary, middle, high school, you got to allocate resources accordingly. You have to make sure you lower class sizes where it's appropriate. The problem with focusing only on class sizes, and again, I love having smaller class sizes, but it's not always possible. What I've seen is that it can fluctuate a lot with the budget. So one year you lower it, the next year you got to increase, next year you lower it. What I always like to ask people is, what are we trying to achieve with a lower class size? Well, one is you want a manageable workload for the teacher. You want the teacher to be able to provide individualized attention. You want to make sure there's opportunities for acceleration and intervention. You want it to be safe, right? Those are some of the things that you want to get amongst us. So are there other ways to achieve that may not just be about, the ratio of teacher to kids? Again, unless it's egregious. If there's something like 40, that's too much. But I always approach it from a sort of values-based perspective, an interest-based perspective. What is it that we're trying to achieve, what we think we're going to get with lower class sizes, and is there a better way to do it, as long as it's not like off the charts?
Super. And related to class sizes, obviously, are teaching staff.
Yep.
So talk about your plans to recruit the best,
Yep.
to compensate fairly, to retain the best, and to develop our talent. How do you do that?
How many of you in here are teachers? I'm assuming there's some teachers. Great. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being here and for doing what you do. I'm going to try to attack this in a couple different ways. One of the things that I did when I was a nonprofit is we launched the first national CTE program, Career Tech Ed program, to inspire young people to become educators. 50% of our kids were kids of color. There is a statewide Educators Rising organization in Wisconsin, but Milwaukee does not have one. One of the things that we learned when doing that work is that about half the kids that we had, they just always wanted to be teachers, for whatever reason, right? The other half of the kids, particularly young men, they were interested in their communities. They were interested in serving their communities. They were maybe leaders on their sports team. Maybe they were teaching in church, whatever it may be. And when they got tapped on the shoulder, like they had social justice in mind. They were thinking about, I want to serve, and when they were tapped on the shoulder by a teacher they respected and said, hey, Josh, you want to be a teacher? Come to this class, check it out. They got the buzz. And then you come to our conference every year and like to see all these young men who were like, yeah, I want to be a teacher. It's a really powerful way of recruiting a new population of kids to become teachers. Same can be done and should be done for, grow your own programs in partnership with institutes of higher ed. I think there are some here. To tap into paraprofessionals or whoever it may be to get them on the path. You can do tuition reimbursement. You got to talk to higher ed, and this is what I've done. Like you have to align the higher ed work to the work in the district, and you have to get higher ed to change when they deliver some of the lessons, right? Whether it's virtual, whether it's at night, you got to make some accommodations and partnerships so that you can inspire young people or other people to become educators, whether it's career switchers and actually, I won't get into too much of the policy, but if you look at the New American Foundation, they've got like the best playbook on this. Retention is all about culture. So when I look at data on teacher retention, teacher absences, I always like to break it down because we know that teachers of color tend to leave at twice the rate that white teachers do. Oftentimes because the one black male teacher in the building is also assigned to discipline, right? And the one teacher who speaks Spanish is assigned to be the translator. So we do all these things. John King, former Secretary of Education, calls it the double tax. And you can look at it in the data. So you go through the data and say, well, why do people leave? Do we do exit reviews, all that kind of stuff? What is the culture in that school building? When I was in Montgomery County, we used the Gallup Q12 survey. I think I might have been the first district in the country to do that, where you actually measure engagement. In corporations, you do it, the more engaged people are, the more profitable a company is. Schools are not about profit. But it's this idea, are you leaning into your work? Like, are you there? And you can actually measure it. And what we did was, with the results, I had 200 schools, but with the results, we provided direct coaching to principals on how to improve it. We also made sure that while it was not formally bargained as part of their evaluation, I wasn't able to achieve that. It was clear what the expectation was. And I still remember this one principal who had gotten great results. Her engagement scores were terrible, and she was eligible for retirement. And she said, Josh, I just don't think I can do this new work. Like, I don't think I know. She's like, I didn't realize. I'm like, I just thought our scores were the most important thing. And she ended up retiring. And like, I was so proud of her to like acknowledge it and own it. So culture is essential when you're looking at retention. And that's where serving and supporting the principal and making sure that the principal knows how to create a good culture, effective teamwork, activate their teachers as leaders, right? That's what principals do to keep teachers in the building and make sure that they're happy and engaged and doing all that work. That's what we know. The last part was compensation.
Yes.
I wish I could solve the compensation problem like that, right? I wish I could. I am definitely in the category of people who are like, teachers do not get paid enough. I always like, I won't go into that. Like, when I look at, I get there, I don't know, those of you parents, if you guys get the sort of regular report, like when you get an email when your kid's assignment is graded. Do you get those? Do you guys do that here? We get that. I get way too many. I never talk to my son about it. I don't care. I just look at the report card. But I get these emails, and I'm like, oh, wait a second. I'm getting an email from a teacher at 10 o'clock, or it's coming through the system at 10 o'clock at night. It's coming through or it's coming through on the weekends. I'm like, anybody who thinks that teachers are only working, a short amount, doesn't understand the profession. But I also know the compensation, while it's always something that you want to increase, it's a matter of choices, right? How much do you have in your budget? What are the performance expectations for it, right? So you want to do as much as you can to compensate as much as you can. And I also will never make any promises about that because, we know how budgets go. We know how challenging it can be. And I also do believe that it needs to mean something. Right? I mean, it needs to mean something when you're investing in anything. So it can be a very tough nut to crack when you're just trying to, across the board, raise teacher salaries. But certainly, I do want people to be paid at an appropriate level for the work they're doing to support kids.
Right. And there were a couple questions specific to teachers' unions, but I think it would be fair to say, what is your experience in working with unions, and what role do they play in district decision-making?
Deep and partners at the table. Should I stop there? All right, I'll keep going. Yeah, so I have extensive experience working with teacher unions, both as a system leader and as a superintendent. Northeast, unions are different than what I found in Montgomery County. I have always taken an interest-based approach. I'm a big believer in interest-based negotiations, and I'm a big believer in those who have power in the system should be at the table to make decisions, right? So I have gone to arbitration with the unions when I need to go to arbitration with the unions, right? I have fought for what I need to fight for kids, and I will always do that, and I'm not going to promise you that I won't, but I've always found that through relationships and by bringing them to the table and by agreeing, if we can agree on certain things, we want kids to read on grade level. Right? We want teachers to have the support they need to be successful, right? We want them to be working in positive school environments. We want them to be compensated appropriately, right? We want those who are not doing well to be offered opportunities to consider other options, right? Once they're given support. There's a lot we can agree on. What I find is that it can be hard to actually get to the table when people have all these very, they're in their sandbox, right? They have and it can be hard to bring them to the table. I have always found that by setting that table, you can make much better decisions on behalf of kids. Montgomery County, Maryland, their union is considered the gold standard teachers union in the country. They did some wonderful things, and they were involved in my decision-making for everything. I mean, budget decisions, redistricting decisions, because they were partners and they policed themselves. I got to be very clear. They would not let anybody be in leadership who wasn't deeply committed to interest-based bargaining and the shared values of the district, right? They wouldn't let anybody, and it was great. So I had an honest partner who we worked on hard issues around equity, and so many other things because we rolled up our sleeves together. So I'd much rather have people at the table. I've done that before. Look, sometimes families fight. It's the way it goes. Truth springs from arguments amongst friends. David Hume said that. Sometimes that happens, and if you got to fight, you got to fight. It is not it's not my starting place at all, because I'm a big believer in interest-based negotiations, but everybody has to do that. It's not okay for the superintendent to say, okay, let's do interest-based work, and then the union or somebody else says, no, we're not going to do that. Well, you don't get to create the landscape completely on your own, right? It's a collective. So my assumption is that people have interested kids at heart, and then are willing to listen to and engage in new ways of learning about in new ways of doing the work. And sometimes that works out great, and sometimes it doesn't. But my experience is deep.
Super. Policy and governance. What's the difference between board goals and district goals? How do they align? How are they created? And if you take the superintendency, how will you be evaluated?
So the sort of godfather of board policy work, John Carver, says that there should be no different goals for the CEO or the board than there are of the organization. Really easy to say in practice, very hard to do, or really easy to say in theory, very hard to say in practice. This kind of goes back to the question about structure earlier. Clarity, right? Who's responsible for what? People who serve on boards are, for the most part, committed public servants that want to do the right thing. And they get elected to the board, what I found, because they have this desire to do the right thing. Some people may not. And then they get on the board and they realize, oh my gosh, this is really complex. And the thing that I ran on, I actually don't, and holy moly, but this is complex. This is what I found I've worked, I think I've had 68 or 69 elected board members in my time. And then you get to all the other elected officials. So much of it is about clarity, and so much of it is about what we have established as the collective goals for the system. So what I like to do is, if you have a policy, and I do believe that you should have fewer policies, like less is more when it comes to policy, if you have the right policies, you have a strategic plan that says here's the 3 to 5 year goals, and then you align your calendars. So if there's board committees, right, the question is you really should be sitting down in the beginning of the year and saying, okay, when are we monitoring, academics? When are we monitoring, safety, whatever it may be? You align it to the strategic plan, you align it to the budget, right? Because there's a rhythm to all these things so that everybody can kind of know what to expect when we're doing this work. But the governance of public school systems can be really opaque to the public because they don't know how decisions get made. And that's where transparency is essential. It's also where helping the board and everybody else, not just the board, it's the cabinet, it's principals, understand what's above the line, what's below the line is essential, right? Who actually gets to make the decision? Do people know who's making the decision? Are we clear about the processes? When's it going to be monitored and reported on? Why are we putting this policy in place? What do we expect to get from it? Right? Why are we spending our time? Those are the kinds of, you got to spend a lot of time in the design work up front if you want the end result to be something that says, everyone says, yeah, okay, I get it. I see where they're going. I see why the budget's this way. I see the strategic plan. I see who's responsible for what.
I think there's 2 other topics that the audience is very interested in, so I'm going to try and squeeze them in.
I'll try to talk.
One is that budget issue. So
Yeah.
obviously there have been financial issues here. There's budget development issues.
Yep.
There have been referendums supported by communities or not supported. What's your approach for creating a budget?
Yep.
Just give us a peek of what that looks
Oh
like.
my God, I'll try to be quick.
Yeah.
So what I like to do typically when I design a budget, which is always a matter of choices, I actually like to start in July when I have a public meeting with the board on what their interests are. So class size is the perfect thing. I never want the board or anybody else to come in February, I'm assuming the budget goes out in March, and say, oh, do this or do that, right? Because you spend so much time. So you actually want to have the conversation up front in July or August, where you lay out your interests. You say, here's the kinds of things that we're looking at, without saying the specific position or program, increase music teachers by X%, or put, I was at a conference and I saw this great social emotional, put that in the budget. That's not the way you do it. You got to up front sort of talk about what the values are that you have. Every budget decision must be made in alignment with the collective values of the organization. You need to see it. You got to draw a straight line between line items and what we say our shared values are. I typically start my budget process then in October, where every central office department has to submit I don't do zero-based because that never really works, but it has to submit a spending plan that directly shows how they are going to improve student achievement, like what their role is in improving student achievement, and you got to put it on record. Bring it all together, right? And then what I did in Montgomery County, I don't know if we could do this here, and I inherited this, but we had a parent group, employee groups, meaning teachers, support staff, and principals, and then my team at the table during budget deliberations before we went public, right? Because it's a collective effort, and hard decisions need to be made. And what you don't want is to go out there with a budget that's a surprise to anybody. Right? You want to be clear that here's the deal, here's the issues, here's what we got to reckon with, here's how much revenue we got coming in, here's where our title dollars are going. So I like to be very deliberate about it, and then you involve the board in committee typically about 3 months before it goes public. You have all the public reviews and all that. I also, well, I know we got to stop, but there's a whole bunch of different ways of doing public engagement that's very different than people just coming up to the microphone. There's ways you can actually do it in smaller groups that we used to do. And that way, when the budget comes out, look, no one is ever going to agree with everything in there. You know, no one's ever going to agree with everything, but at least people can say, okay, it's reasonable, I get it. I understand why they're doing this, I wish we do this. The other thing about budgets is, when people bring new things, it's not a matter of if, it's more a matter of when. If you can't do something, question, when can we do this? Right? Not yes or no. I mean, some things you just can't do, but say, when can we do this? What would it look like for us to be able to get there given all the competing demands? So that's the approach I typically take.
Before we do a final kind of wrap up and why you're the choice, I know the audience is very interested in the question about the school liaison officers and that. Can you comment on?
School resource officers?
Yes,
Yeah.
resources officers, please, your position and
Yeah.
how you would work with the board on that.
Yeah, so I have always had school resource officers. So when the school resource officer initiative started in the 90s, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention was the one who seeded it. It was very much about building relationships between young people and police. And in the last 15 years or so, it has become a safety mechanism. And while certainly school resource officers can and should be providing a layer of safety, they are not the ones who are ultimately responsible for the safety of a school. That's the school principal's job, right? And unfortunately, they've become this sort of symbol of like safety. And there's a lot of tension in a lot of communities with school resource officers. When I was in Stanford, and I know this is public, so sorry, but the way it was organized from the police department was really problematic. They didn't really want to meet with us. They actually disincentivized the people who were chosen. So the people who were school resource officers, many of them didn't want to be there. And some of them can be antagonistic to kids. And I had one high school principal, I still remember, she's like, Josh, he's actually causing problems, but like, what can I do? And I have to talk to the police chief. It was hard. It was really hard. Montgomery County, complete opposite. The police chief and I got along great. I brought in, so I would meet with the high school principals and the school resource officers once a year at least, and we would talk to them about like, here's how we want things to run. Police chief was fabulous. He was like, no, this is a partnership, and the people they chose, they were trained. So you have to be really intentional and deliberate about who you choose, why they're there, roles and responsibilities, right? And also correcting behaviors that sometimes can be this sort of gray area with power, right? I have seen some school resource officers overstep in situations, which is bad for kids. And I've also seen, quite frankly, some principals kind of shy away and say, well, there's nothing I can do. And so you got to be really intentional and deliberate. Most importantly, and I'll stop on this, whatever it is we do with school resource officers, we have to recognize, one, there's already a relationship with the police department that exists, and they're part of the fabric of the safety of the community. We've got to figure out what that should look like. Two, got to talk to kids. I mean, I already, kids, I've asked them, but I want to know what young people have to say about school resource officers and police. And for me, that becomes the sort of basis of like what you want. How does a kid feel, how does a young person feel safe in school? What should the role of school resource officers and police be? And then kind of build on top of that. Because those are the ones, those are the people we're trying to serve. So that's how I would approach it.
Right. We're going to let you wrap up. Tell us why you are the choice, why we should believe you, convince us. And somebody very frankly said, for those of us that have heard all these things before, convince us that you can do it.
Oh, man, you said convince us that we can do it.
And how long will you stay? That's another one.
As long as you'll have me. So Superintendents do not act alone. Superintendents are the stewards of the community's values, as manifest through the election of the Board of Education, the Board of Directors. That's the way it works. And I know and have coached and have talked to a lot of superintendents who have gone in and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. And then they run in, then they don't organize collective effort, and then they're done. And you're only as good as the people around you will let you be if they're part of the work. My track record in as 10 years as a superintendent of schools, leading bold equity agendas that resulted in increases in student achievement is on the record. So you've already Googled me, go and read the case studies, right? You can see it. Are there things I wish I'd done differently, things I wish I'd done more or less? Of course. Was everything, no. The list of, that's not the way it works. But I have a track record as a superintendent of schools that's done bold equity work and has made sure that kids get what they need to improve. I've also led in the nonprofit and the corporate sector, and the reason why I want to go back in and the reason why I want to be in Milwaukee now is because all my work that I've done learning some of those practices, but also working with folks around the country, I just learned so much that I'm like, you know what, I really want to do this again. And when the Milwaukee job came up, it was at this perfect time for me, because I was like, I'm done with corporate America, and I want to serve as a superintendent again. And the challenge and the promise and the potential and the opportunity that exists here fits exactly with what I know how to do and work I love to do. This is about how we organize ourselves. This is about how we find courage and backbone to make hard choices. There are other systems and other districts that we can look at, that we can say, hey, there's some really interesting practices that have gone on. You don't just sort of take it and you got to figure out what's right. But I know how I've done that work with folks, know how that works. The question becomes one of collective courage and collective commitment to excellence. There is, for me, the non-negotiable is that every child is in a great school every single day. They are loved, valued, and respected every day. They feel seen. Right? That's what that teachers are engaged and are leading the work. The principals have created a really powerful, supportive, collaborative culture, and that families are at the table with us, right? We know how to do that work. I know how to do that work. I've done it. I love that work. I love it. And that's the work I want to do here in Milwaukee. So if I am your superintendent of schools, I can promise you transparency. I can promise you an equity focus. I can promise a collective effort. Hard decisions will need to be made. I think you all know that, right? If you all have the courage to say, yeah, we got to do that, then I'm the guy you want that's going to help us get there, right? If people are happy with the way things are in the status quo, I am not your guy. That's not what I do. That's not how I roll. But if you have the courage to say, yeah, we gotta do something that's right for our children because they deserve something more than what they're currently getting, even though folks are working so hard. People in this room are working so hard every day. That's the work. That's the work I love to do, and that's what I want to do here in Milwaukee. So I think I'm getting the hook. For those of you who remember the guy, thank you all.
Join me in thanking
I appreciate you being here.
Dr.
Thank you for
Josh
those, and I hope to see you soon.
If you would take your seat, please, we can begin in about 1 minute. Thank you. If you would take your seat, we'll begin in about 1 minute. Thank you. Excuse me, if you folks in the back can hear me, if you would take a seat, if you're going to stay, we can get started. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks. Well, our last, it was not intentional that this last candidate is before you at this time because you've got to cut him a little slack. His plane was delayed. He got in at 1:30 this morning. And here he is, you know. Just a quick reminder, please make sure you share your feedback with the board using the QR code. And I've been asked several times what comes next. I just want to reiterate for you, this is the sole responsibility of your elected Board of Education. This is their job. That's by state statute. That is their job. They are working extremely hard to get your input. So thank you for being here. Make sure you share your thoughts with them. They will get the full spreadsheet of all the comments that you share with them. So thank you. But we try and clarify that in every district because it is the role and responsibility of a Board of Education, and that's by state statute, state rule, if you will. Okay, we're going to get started again. So same procedures, same types of questions. I apologize if you think your question isn't, I'm trying to incorporate new things as they come, so shout out and we'll see what we can do. Join me, please, in welcoming Dr. Andre Townsell.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me clearly? All right, well, I will share, although my flight was delayed, I was not going to miss this for the world. So I'm so thankful that I have the privilege to share with you. So I'll start by introducing myself, and then I'll park and allow her to hit me with the questions. Dr. Andre Townsell, currently Superintendent of Calvert County Public Schools in Maryland, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. All right. Are you from Detroit? Okay. I am a graduate of Detroit Public Schools. Ultimately, I graduated from high school and earned a football scholarship to Howard University. While at Howard University, okay, we at church now, here we go. While at Howard University, my football scholarship turned to 3 degrees, a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctoral degree. And I know that sounds good. It didn't just happen that easy. I did have adverse childhood experience, specifically, although I did earn a football scholarship, I only played football my senior year in high school because I was struggling in my 9th, 10th, and 11th grade years. And it was because of some of the coaches and counselors and educators in Detroit public schools that kind of snatched me up. They really changed the trajectory of my future. And so April of my senior year, my trajectory changed. That's when I earned that scholarship by doing what some of the educators told me to do. And it didn't just become easy once I got to Howard. Actually, my freshman year, I was kicked out because of academic ineligibility, GPA too low to play the sport that they brought me there to play. Head coach gave me a second opportunity, allowed me to go to summer school, and ultimately did get my bachelor's degree. But then I figured it out, and I was on a roll, and I've not stopped since. And currently, as an educator, I'm on a mission to ensure that I have the opportunity to positively change the trajectory of some young people's lives like mine was changed. So that's my mission. With that, okay, I'll take the clap. With that, I will park my bus. And well, let me share this. I do have 2 children and a wife. My wife is a physician at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. She does maternal fetal medicine. My son is a 7th grader. If we have the privilege of coming here, he will be a Milwaukee Public School student. My daughter is a 2nd grader, go to 3rd grade next year. And so I will have skin in the game. I want what's best for my young people. And if I have the privilege to educate your students, I will absolutely put my best foot forward because I will have skin in the game. And I will share that this is not a job for me. I'm on a mission. and I'm an educator, and I take very much pride with the mission of education. So with that, I'm happy to park my bus and take some questions.
Okay, let's talk about your leadership style. Specifically, what would we see for you and your style, and how you would apply it, and what strategies would you use to foster collaboration and communication within our district and also outside of our district?
Thank you. Well, my leadership style, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very collaborative. I'm a team player. And when I say that, I do not just say that. I really work in a team mentality. I call it the triple V's of leadership. I'm visible, I'm vocal, and I'm vigilant. You see me, you hear me, and you're going to feel me. Meaning whatever the board or whatever we put in place, when there's a policy to be implemented, a plan to be implemented, a direction that we're going in, it's my job as a superintendent to ensure that that occurs. And if you have the opportunity to look at my resume, every level that I had the privilege of working, student achievement occurs, teamwork occurs, drama does not happen, not under my watch. As a leader, I do not play games, I don't undermine. I'm not built like that. I'm a man of faith and a man of integrity. And one thing that's gotten me very far is that I treat people the way I want to be treated. So that's my goal, to continue to treat people how I want to be treated and get the work done. Have the tough conversations, but get us all in the room and let's come to a consensus and move together for the greater good of the whole body.
Super. So you've been here a day and you've had previous interviews. What have you learned about what citizens, Milwaukee citizens, want for MPS?
Citizens of Milwaukee Public School want the best for their students. One thing that I've learned just doing a Google search, when information come up about the community, it just happens to be negative. But I'm of the philosophy of tell your story, lest people tell the story for you. So I think it's important for us to signal boost the great things that are happening in Milwaukee Public School. Very specifically today, when I was doing a tour, I had the opportunity to go to one of our schools, and I've learned that we have schools in Wisconsin that happen to be in Milwaukee that are a part of the Turnaround Arts program. That's a national program with the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. In the entire country, there's less than 50 schools that participate in that opportunity. I mean, who knew? That's happening right here in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee Public School, and no one knows about it. I think it's very important to signal boost the great things that are occurring, because often what I hear, especially from our young people that are achieving, is why are we only focusing on the bad? There's good things that happen. And it's important for me as a superintendent to be an expert communicator of the great things that are happening for our young people, and I will do that. So my leadership style is collaboration, teamwork, and ultimate transparency.
With that ultimate transparency, talk about communication. Somebody shared a parent concern that sometimes they find out things publicly that didn't come from the school, and an example was today's story about lead exposure in some Milwaukee buildings. What concrete steps will you take to improve communication with parents?
I think it's important to get ahead of the narrative. I found success in my past when I have advisory councils, such as a parent advisory council or a student advisory council or a teacher advisory council, having that constant pipeline of communication that's two-way, where you learn information, you share information. I think it's important to know if there's issues, for example, like lead. I think it's a shock to everybody if you're finding out through the media. It's very important to not only share that information with your Board of Education, but with your executive cabinet, and put that information out to get ahead of it. And that's where you can disarm individuals that want to use stuff like that against you. So it's very important to communicate effectively, efficiently, and early. There's nothing wrong with over-communicating. I have a habit of over-communicating. I'd rather tell you and you not need to know than you need to know and you haven't heard about it. That's my style.
Question about equity. Equity has become a buzzword amongst many school districts, including ours. What are your plans to ensure equity is institutionalized in our culture? And what does that mean for disenfranchised students? And also your plan to collaborate with organizations to support all of our students?
I think the answer to this question is you find the need, you meet the need. There is not one approach to supporting all. I believe every school, every community has its own culture, so to speak. So that means some schools have different needs. In Maryland specifically, one thing we were able to do was something called the concentration of poverty formula, whereas you were able to see where your schools had the largest concentration of poverty, and that's where the funds flowed. Because sometimes young people need support like wraparound services. Sometimes when young people are having issues with chronic absenteeism, you need supports to put in place. And a lot of time when you say support, that means money to address it. So that's the equity piece. You find the need and you meet that need. And that should be a philosophy and a process that occur at every last one of our schools. Even our high-performing schools, still there are needs. When I talk about student achievement, ladies and gentlemen, I'm talking about raising the floor and the ceiling at the same time, and we all level up.
Let's see. How do you plan to navigate the current climate of our district infrastructure? So what's needed operationally, organizationally, whether it's central office, whether it's support for principals, what does that look like? What type of organizational structure is needed, and how will you go about creating that?
I think it's important to examine the organizational structure as it exists. Just because new leadership comes in does not mean everything is bad that's already there. I think it's important to look at what's existing, what works, and find opportunities to possibly make changes. When I consider central office and buildings, I think it's very important to establish a culture whereas the central office support the schoolhouse. We don't just sit and hang out in our offices. We actually feet and boots on the ground, feet on land, seeing with our own eyes the support that our different schools need. That's a philosophy in which I lead with. When we talk about, for example, in some cases, I know there's conversations of possibly closing some facilities because of the underutilization of our buildings. I think it's important to lean into those communities that may be affected and listen and understand the potential racial undertones that sometimes it shares and address the issue of the school people choosing to not go to those individual schools. How do we ensure that those schools are attractive, especially when you're competing against vouchers and you're competing against charters? How do we make Milwaukee Public School the school of choice? And you address that by leveling up the academic achievement, addressing the climate and culture with regards to the behaviors, and ensuring that that instruction is engaging, whereas our young people want to be in the classroom, and allow the numbers to do the talking. And I believe the enrollment will go up if people are choosing you, but they choose you when you outperform. So if the data says that charter schools are not outperforming our public schools, not only do we signal boost that message, we also amplify it and put a campaign and recruit people to our schools. And I think you can address that.
4 areas are in need of attention and improvement. How do you plan to raise academic performance in reading and mathematics, student absenteeism, decrease student absenteeism, and improve graduation rates? I can repeat
Improving
those
graduation rates, increasing academic achievement, specifically with regards to literacy. It can be done. When I look at your NAEP scores and I see that the data suggests that it's the lowest probably in the country in some cases with regards to proficiency and literacy, I had the opportunity to put together an enhanced literacy plan for Milwaukee Public Schools because the district in which I lead in Maryland, we have the highest test scores in literacy, the highest student achievement, 2 years consecutively when you talk about ELA and writing. And specifically when you talk about the NAEP scores, in the state of Maryland, prior to my arrival in 2022, we were ranked 40th in the state. When we got our NAEP scores, when you got your NAEP scores, we're now 20th, excuse me, not in the state, but in the nation. We jumped from 40 to 20 from one NAEP to the next. And I believe it's because our attention to detail and investment in the science of reading, something that's already happening here, The question is, how is it being implemented here? We do letters training too. We do Ames Web too, but we're getting the return on investment of that. The question is, how do we make sure that happens here? And I believe I outlined what we've done in my previous district to show how we've increased academic achievement, and I do think it could be duplicated here. When I went around to every school and spoke to teachers and building administrators and even speaking with young people, there's no lack of resources. There's no lack. I think that if a plan is in place that is co-signed, I think that we can absolutely increase academic achievement with staunch attention to detail. And I've submitted that to the board as well, so it's public.
There is public information. All three candidates were asked to submit, so thank you for sharing that. Let's talk about those teachers and talk about everything that's in that bucket. Recruitment, retention, compensation, professional development. How do you do that for MPS teachers?
Well, I believe that the field of education overall gets a bad rap. I mean, the cliche when I was coming out of high school is those that can do, those that don't teach. Even today in 2025, I believe sometimes in the field of education, educators feel like we're overworked and underappreciated. I think it's important to invest in the morale of our educators and appreciate them. In my previous two school districts in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and Calvert County, Maryland, everywhere I've been, I've raised salaries of educators. When I got to Benton Harbor, Michigan, not only were we $14 million deficit as a district, teachers have been frozen on the salary scales for over a decade. Well, when I had the opportunity to work collaboratively with my CFO, the Michigan State Department of Treasury, on a deficit elimination plan, the surplus that I saw, I re-established teachers on that salary scale and gave them retention bonuses if they decided to stay. And that was very successful. In Calvert County Public Schools, I ensured that we paid the highest starting teacher salary in our region. The starting teacher salary by state law had to be $60,000 in Maryland by 2026, July 1. July 1 of 2025, I made it $61,000 effective immediately with a new signed contract for teachers. I started it in advance, and that is the highest salary than all of the schools in our region in Southern Maryland. I believe that you have to invest in teachers and make them feel like professionals, and not only make them feel like professionals, but treat them like professionals. They are the experts. They are the ones on the ground with our young people every single day, and they need to be treated as champions.
Piggybacking on that too, and not specific, hang on, let me get it right. Not specific just to teachers' unions, but all unions. What is your experience in working with unions, and what is the role of unions in decision-making?
My experience of working with unions, very specifically, as recently as June of 2024, I was able to negotiate contracts with my education support staff union, my teachers union, and currently right now I'm negotiating contract with my principal union, and it's going extremely well. Not only am I the superintendent of Calvert County Public School, I have the privilege of serving as the president of the Public School Superintendent Association of Maryland. All of the superintendents in Maryland voted me to serve as their president and represent them. As a part of being the president of PSAM, the Public School Superintendent Association of Maryland, I work with a team called MNS, the Maryland Negotiation Services, and every year in the fall and November, we put on a contract on how to negotiate. We do it in good faith. We put all the information on the table and do what's best, not only for the educator, but for the child. So I meet on a regular basis monthly with all of my leadership of every union that is represented in my school district. I have that open line of communication. It's two-way, and ladies and gentlemen, it's very effective. I have a great relationship with all of my union presidents currently, and I had one when I was in Michigan with our different unions. In fact, I'll just go back to what I know about unions. I'm being born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. My father has worked at Ford Motor Company since he was 18 years old. He still works now on the assembly line at Ford Motor Company, and he's a part of a union, the UAW. And I know what it means to have a relationship with the union or not. There's been times I was hoping and wishing my dad wouldn't get laid off. There's been times I've been hoping and wishing my father didn't get fired. So I respect the unions, but it's good to have a working, collaborative relationship with those unions and do the greater good for the community. But that comes, ladies and gentlemen, by having those relationships early and often and keep on massaging that relationship so you can move mountains for kids.
To shift into some specific programs. MPS is home to the largest bilingual program in Wisconsin. What is your experience leading bilingual programs for multilingual learners? What is your vision for MPS? How do you plan to support students and particularly lead during some very tense times around immigration and protecting our schools and our children from ICE?
I think that's a great question. When I was a high school principal in Southbridge, Massachusetts, that's Worcester County, my student population was over 60% Hispanic and the rest other. Most of my population spoke English as a second language. And with that, not only did I have a diverse staff, meaning bilingual assistant principals and counselors, we had a diverse teaching staff, and we were able to put together a school improvement plan to show increased student achievement. And what we use as our baseline to test whether students were achieving was based off of the WIDA test and the access test. And we saw that our young people achieved year to year on that WIDA and access assessment, which showed that we took seriously the pedagogy that happened in bilingual education. With regards to ICE specifically, when I worked currently, as a matter of fact, last week in Maryland, there was an alarm that went out in the community because some school districts put out guidance on how we were protecting children. And then the director of ICE called one of our assistant principals. And as the president of the Public School Superintendent Association, I was able to join a call with the director of ICE, the state superintendent, and all superintendents in the state of Maryland to say, hey, listen, what is the expectation with this new direction we're going in? And we were able to learn what they are going to do and what they're not going to do. Specifically, what they said is that we are not going to arrest parents on campus. We are not going to go to your school and ask for young people's data. But what we are looking to do is go after the criminals within our community. So with that information coming directly from our directors, we were able to get guidance with our state superintendent to draft guidance to go out to our community to ease those fears. And those fears have been eased in Maryland.
Great. Let's shift to some other current topics. Enrollment. How will you address enrollment challenges? And what is your approach to community engagement in addressing those challenges?
My goal to address enrollment here in Milwaukee is when I look at the data, I realize that out of all of the young people going to K-12 education, about 55 to 60% chooses Milwaukee Public School. The rest go to the charter or the private school opportunity. It is incumbent upon me as the superintendent to ensure that Milwaukee Public Schools is the best school system it could possibly be. So when parents are looking in their neighborhoods at all of the schools, I want you to choose Milwaukee Public Schools because of what the data says. If you look at the data, traditionally, public charter schools do not outperform our public schools. So the question is, what are they choosing? And if we're performing better, I think it's important for us to signal boost that information and go on a campaign and advertise for our school. And Detroit is also school of choice. So there's a lot of suburban school districts and communities that are busing to Detroit and pulling kids out of Detroit to take them to their school district. But once Detroit became a stronger district with better academic programming and enrichment opportunities for young kids, the enrollment has increased year by year and has stabilized. I think that process can absolutely happen here. When I started my education career in the District of Columbia, DC Public Schools, we have that same setup where it's a competition between the public and the charter school. And in my time when I was in DC Public School, we proved to be the fastest improving urban school district in the nation. And I do believe we can bring those exact same tactics here to change the perception of Milwaukee Public Schools so we don't have to worry about possibly closing down schools. Because you're choosing our schools, we might need to open up schools because the enrollment should swell. Thank you.
Related but not necessarily a cause, let's talk about attendance. So obviously related to enrollment, but we have schools where attendance is really poor. It's a challenge. It needs different support and different resources, perhaps across different schools. How do you address student attendance?
When I had the opportunity to look at the data here in Milwaukee, I noticed that you had a high rate of chronic absenteeism. And to unpack that, chronic absenteeism meaning if you miss 10% of the school day. So if there's 180 days of school and you miss 18 days, you're chronically absent, you're truant. I believe that the goal is to, out of those student advisory conversations and parent advisory councils, to understand why our young people are not choosing to come to school and address that. What is it about our school environment make it whereas young people are not excited to come? One thing that I've learned just in the educational landscape, a lot of times public education is several years behind society. For example, when you talk about artificial intelligence, how long have Siri been on your phone? That's AI. But now we're saying, what is AI? Stay away from AI. No, I think it's important to embrace the technology and ensure that the classroom technology is caught up to what young people are doing in society, and it would be no problem for our young people to come to school and not be bored. We don't want them to be disengaged with our education. We want them to be engaged.
Talk about policy and governance. What is the difference between board goals and district goals? How do they align? And if you become the superintendent of this district, how will your job performance be evaluated?
The mission of the superintendent is they work at the pleasure of the Board of Education. So the Board of Education develop policy, and it's the job of the superintendent to implement that policy. And based off of that policy, put procedures in place to ensure that those policies are implemented. I think it's important to know what the will is of the board. And one thing that you learn in superintendent training is that the superintendent, although you are supervised by the board, that superintendent-board relationship is key. The superintendent manages the board by keeping them updated with all the latest information. So if there's a direction that we'd like to go in, it's incumbent upon the superintendent to bring all the facts on the table and allow the Board of Education to make that decision. And I do believe that when the superintendent and the Board of Education is aligned, the goals and guardrails are easy because we're all on the same page. And then that next step is to ensure that it trickles down to district improvement, to school improvement, to classroom improvement.
Super. Let's trickle down to budget. So this district, as you know, has had some financial difficulties. Many have been in the press. There have been referendums with question from the public of how money is used, and still question about how budgets are created. When you draft a budget, where do you start? Can you walk us through your thought process?
Absolutely. Drafting a budget, I think it's very important to do what I call a zero-based budgeting model, because the goal is to only utilize what you need, because we are the fiduciary of taxpayer dollars. It's important that for every dollar spent from our taxpayers, that there is an academic return on investment. So when building out a budget, for example, you shall know budgets in most cases are generally about 80% salaries and wages. So that means people. So when you're trying to balance a budget, you don't always want to ensure that people is on the line. You look at those contracted services. I think a lot of us probably subscribe to Netflix, Hulu, Disney, Apple, Peacock. Which one are you not using? And if you're not using it, cancel it. And that's the philosophy. Is a lot of times I found in my inventory, there's a lot of licenses and a lot of contracts that we have and money that's being spent for services not being used. I think it's important to start at that level and then balance the budget off that. In addition to what I was able to do in Calvert County Public Schools, working collaboratively with my finance department, is ensuring that the money that was sitting in our fund balance was being invested. And then this past year, we had our money in our fund balance put it into an investment account, and we generated $1 million worth of revenue just by the money being invested. So having that financial agility to know how to work it. In 2023, I enrolled in Georgetown University's Edunomics Graduate School of Public Policy and earned my certification in education finance to take my financial acumen to the next level. I'm a constant learner. I do believe that there is always opportunity to find savings so you do not have to cut. In addition, one thing I was able to do was to underspend my FY24 and underspend currently my FY25 budget by looking not only at contracted services, but also paying attention to attrition. And sometimes there's positions that may not need to be refilled, in some cases based off of the need of the district, and that's good to do as well. So we were able to save and we were able to underspend my fiscal year 24 budget by $6.5 million, and currently right now, fiscal year 25 is being underspent by $2.5 million. So that covers about $9 million of gap that I have in my expenditure over my revenue, where I don't cut people, I use the savings from my fund balance.
Thank you. Related to those types of decisions, there's a question on class size. Class sizes are out of control. We have many classrooms across grades that may have just under 40 students. What are your thoughts on class size and specifically on a district-wide cap on class sizes?
Class sizes shall be defined in the negotiating agreement with the teachers union. In the districts I had the privilege of serving, we always had class size in there. For example, we have written that class size in some cases should not exceed over 30 students. I think it's important to look at the negotiated agreement between the union and the district and see what's agreed upon first with regards to class sizes. Now, in addition, it's important to understand that class size equals FTE, that's people, that's teachers. So if you have 40 individuals in the classroom and you want 20 students per class, then that becomes 2 teachers to 40 students, if that makes sense. So it's important to look at the enrollment and ensure that it's to the ratio you want to see with your human capital in your building. And when you do the math at that level, looking specifically at that zero-based budgeting, not having the like-to-haves, but the need-to-haves in your building, I think you can address that class size. The question is, where are the teachers? If it's 40 students in the classroom, where are the teachers? Are they specialists? Are they floating in the hall? Where are the teachers? So it's looking at where our roster is. What position do you hold, and what do we possibly need to reallocate?
Another current topic, can you speak about school resource officers in schools, your belief, your position, whether the school district should comply with the law, and your understanding and support for safe havens?
I think it's very important, first and foremost, to understand, and this is in my learnings in education, is that no policy ever trumps law. I don't care what state you're in. You are not allowed to make a policy that overrides law. Does that make sense when I say that? So that's just baseline anywhere in the United States of America. I believe here in Wisconsin, there was a law put in place that school resource officers must be in place a year ago. And I do understand that Milwaukee Public Schools have not implemented the resource officer program. I had the opportunity to look into resource officers here in Milwaukee and realized, if I'm not mistaken, during the pandemic, the district decided to cancel its relationship with the resource officer program within the community based off of the themes that arose from that partnership in the past. I think because it's law, it's important to see what the options are moving forward. For example, in Detroit public schools, They do not partner with the Detroit City Police Department for resource officers. They develop their own police department within the school system. So the question is, can we develop our own Milwaukee Public School Police Department and satisfy the resource officer opportunity? It's worth exploring because I think it's important to listen to the community. My philosophy is I don't want to do something to you. I don't want to do something for you. I want to do something with you. So I think it's important to bring those issues to the table. Now, I will share, I do have a memorandum of understanding in Calvert County with the sheriff's office to have resource officers in my school. And our community overwhelmingly want every school to have school resource officers. So as their leader, I work collaboratively to make that happen because I work at the pleasure of the board and the board work at the pleasure of their constituents. When I come here, that's a different philosophy. So I have to have a different strategy to ensure that that occurs. If the board overwhelmingly wants school resource officers in the school, it's my job as a superintendent to ensure that that happens. If our board and their constituents are against that, it's my job to find opportunities to still comply with the law. Because as superintendent, I cannot break the law because you could possibly have other ramifications for that.
We spoke a lot about closing achievement gaps, bringing up the bottom, et cetera. Can you speak to your experience working with IB programs, AP, enrichment and advanced and extracurriculars, and how students access those programs?
Absolutely. While serving as an administrator in District of Columbia Public Schools, my high school specifically had a program whereas it was 3 tracks. We had honors, AP, and international baccalaureate. And we worked collaboratively not only with the administrators in that building, but with the families to identify pathways that young people can choose. So as a school assistant principal and a school-based administrator, I directly worked with our international baccalaureate program, our advanced placement program, and our honors program. So I'm very familiar with that. As a matter of fact, I had the opportunity to tour one of our high schools that was a baccalaureate program. One thing I learned about international baccalaureate, although you offer the international baccalaureate program, there is something called earning that IB diploma. So my question goes to, although we offer, what is the rate of young people actually earning the diploma? Because that diploma means something as well, too. So I have a lot of history with International Baccalaureate as a school-based administrator. And I've seen it operate at high levels, and I do know that it exists here in Milwaukee, and I love to advance that if that's what the community likes.
Okay. This session seemed to have gone a little more quickly, so I'm trying to pull a couple extra questions. We have one wrap-up. I think another one might be, what is your experience working with state legislature and breaking partisan gridlock?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, education, ladies and gentlemen, is supposed to be nonpartisan. It's supposed to be that. I do believe whatever happened during the pandemic, a lot of people's antennas went up. And school systems and school districts became extremely polarizing with regards to the political landscape. I have very high-level experience working across political lines, ensuring that we can move the needle for student achievement and for educators. Specifically, again, as the superintendent of Calvert County Public Schools and serving as the president of the Public School Superintendent Association, I often work collaboratively with our governor and state superintendent. I often meet with our state delegates and state senators. As a matter of fact, I'm so engaged that the governor, Governor Wes Moore, appointed me to serve on the Juvenile Services Education Board. And with our state superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, handpicked me to serve on her task force for assessment and accountability. I really pride myself on building relationships with people because the bigger picture is kids. And the goal is we have to work together for the greater good of our young kids because they do not get this time back. So while we have time and we're working together, we must collaborate. Politics have to go to the side for young people to achieve. And I do have a track record of that. I'm doing it right now as I stand. I have meetings already set up with state leaders back in my home district that I'm serving now, and I look forward to even bringing that skill set here to Milwaukee.
And one other question, I believe, before your larger wrap-up. How do you plan to work with families and communities and educators to improve the mental health needs of our students? And also, I think the other one we asked was, and what are your thoughts on, I'll have to think about that. Answer that part first. I have to find
Mental health
it.
needs of our young people. In Maryland, we work on something called the Blueprint for Maryland Futures, and there's something called the 5 pillars. The first pillar is early childhood education. The second pillar is high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. The third pillar is college and career readiness. The fourth pillar is more resources for students to be successful. And that fifth pillar is governance and accountability. Now let's go back to the fourth pillar, more resources for students to be successful. I work collaboratively in Maryland to help develop a consortium of services offered to ensure that mental supports are in place for young people to be successful. Very specifically, I lean into something called social and emotional learning. And we teach the 5 core competencies of social and emotional learning, with the first one being self-awareness. Understanding who you are, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, what you bring to the table. The second being self-management, being unflappable, not letting people get you out of character. That third one being social awareness, understanding what's going on not only in your classroom, in the school, but in your community and in our nation. The fourth core competency being relationship skills, learning how to collaborate and work effectively with one another. And the very last one, ladies and gentlemen, responsible decision making. We believe our young people know what's right, know what's wrong. Not only do they have school leaders to offer support, they also have homes to offer them support. When we build off of those core competencies, and our young people are able to go out into our global society and do what's best for them to ensure that their next move is their best move.
And the other part I found it was your thoughts and beliefs on restorative practices.
I have a lot of experience with restorative practices, specifically when I worked in the District of Columbia Public Schools as a specialist of student discipline and school climate. I collaborated with IIRP, the International Institute of Restorative Practices, and offered professional developments across our school district. Now let me share, restorative practices is sometimes controversial because people do not buy in. I think it's important to know that restorative practices came from a Dear Colleague letter from the Federal Department of Juvenile Services written to the Department of Education. And what they shared was, when we put restorative practices in place in our Juvenile Services Department, these are the outcomes. So that practice was picked up by the school systems in 2017, and that practice has been kind of a cliche and jargon in the space. The problem is there's no buy-in. Sometimes we feel like it's kumbaya. I believe that when individuals buy in and lean into that philosophy, it can absolutely work. I've effectively ran restorative circles. I've done it as a high school principal and as an assistant superintendent, and I saw the return on investment, but I was leading it. And my teacher believed, my team believed in it, and they followed that progress, and we made things happen. The problem is a lot of times that buy-in is not there. So I think investing in the message and the data that suggests why restorative practices are effective, I think then you get that buy-in over time.
And we'll use a combination for your wrap-up question. Relating to why you think you're the best for this position, what do you bring here? And for people who might challenge you and say, yes, we've heard all these things before, convince us that you can do this and tell us how long you'll stay here.
Absolutely. I have a picture here that I can share and pass out to show you my 2nd grade daughter and my 7th grade son, who I hope to become students of Milwaukee Public School, because young people don't need to constantly have their foundation disrupted. I love to graduate my son. I love to graduate my daughter as your superintendent. I think that's my #1 goal, is to find a phenomenal community in a school system that I can have skin in the game, because I'm giving you my best and you're going to get your best from me. In addition to that, I think it's important to understand the community and everything that people want. For the most part, we all want what's best for our kids. So it's our goal to give our best to our kids, and that's what I'm committed to doing. I'm the best for this job because I come with transparent leadership. I'm very approachable and communicative. I don't play games. I treat people the way I want to be treated. I have financial acumen with proven a track record that you can see in real time. And if I'm not mistaken, it probably was Jay-Z that said, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't. Check the numbers and it speak for me.
I believe that brings us to the close of this session. There are questions. I know we tried to incorporate as many as we can. Please share your feedback. And on behalf of the directors of your Board of Education, thank you for being here. Please join me in thanking Dr. Andre Townsend.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.